and the Arab American Institute. So those are some of our sponsors. I mentioned last night Healthy Housing Foundation and Michael Weinstein, who is going to be on the panel on housing tomorrow, is the CEO there, and they do don't miss that. It'll be incredible. Our Revolution, of course, and the National Nurses United, which is our first panel today. So thank you all for your support. Some of you are in the audience. So those of you who are not familiar, that familiar with the Sanders Institute, and you got your introduction last night, I just want to tell you a little bit about it. We were founded in June 2017, really inspired by the work of the Bernie 16 campaign, which so many people in this room participated in. And we traveled around the country, and we met people everywhere, and we said, you know, their voices are not being heard, their stories aren't being told, and we wanted to get their opinions, their perspective out in the dialogue. The national media tends to focus on big issues in a shallow way, not a progressive manner, and they don't pay attention to the daily issues that affect people's quality of life. So this conference came about because our executive director, Dave Driscoll, who has a lot of experience in putting on events, started to talk to our fellows. And any of the fellows that are here know we'd have hour-long conversations. And of course, our 18 fellows all have incredible ideas. So first they'd start and say, well, this is what I'd like to talk about. And then they'd call back and say, oh, but you know what? I think you should invite this person. I want to hear what they have to say. And I think if you do that. And so it was concentric circles. So all of you came about to come here as invited guests because somebody said you had to be here. And I'm finding with every conversation that I have that that's the truth, and we don't have enough time to talk to everybody. So if I haven't talked to you, please come and find me. So the Sanders Institute was founded on the belief that a vital democracy requires an informed electorate, civil discourse, and bold progressive ideas. And that's what this gathering is about. I hope you enjoy the rest of the 2 days, and I hope you're inspired by our speakers. What I'd like to do now is to introduce Karen Ryan, who is representing the Carter Center and is a senior advisor for human rights at the Carter Center. And she has a letter that she's going to read from President Jimmy Carter.
Thank you and welcome. And just let me add, in addition to the great victory in the Senate on the Yemen vote, which is really a very important development. I hope it's the first in a line of many progressive foreign policy votes and victories in the Senate. I think what Senator Sanders proved in the campaign was that you can speak about the occupation, the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories of Palestine without being kicked out of politics. That you can do it and you can speak clearly and specifically and continue. So that's a great trend. So let me read the letter from my boss, former President Jimmy Carter, to Jane O'Meara Sanders and David Driscoll. Thank you for your kind invitation to attend the Sanders Institute inaugural gathering in Burlington, Vermont. Although I cannot be with you today, I send my best wishes for a successful conference. It is gratifying to know that you have brought together some of the world's eminent experts to generate new ideas and action strategies to advance human well-being. In just a few days, we will celebrate the 70th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. When the United Nations was founded in 1945, we expected that the UN Charter would lay the foundation for global peace. And 3 years later, the Declaration would inspire a movement for human rights throughout the world. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had earlier articulated the 4 freedoms which Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt built upon when she led the American effort at the newly established organization to codify a comprehensive compact on human freedom, one that would encompass the freedom of expression and belief alongside the equally essential freedom from want and freedom from fear. The recognition of the obligations of government to fulfill these rights was a defining and revolutionary act. Now, the legitimacy of those in power would be judged by the degree to which they delivered on the promise of peace, equality, and an adequate standard of living for all. When I was elected President of the United States, I placed a high priority on these objectives by pursuing peace through diplomacy in the Middle East, by signing human rights treaties, and supporting democratic movements. I also prioritized civil rights, criminal justice reform, healthcare, women's equality, and renewable energy, believing that advances in these areas would enhance the human rights of those in our own country. A global movement grew consistently over the next decades. Unfortunately, policies later adopted in the United States resulted in exponential growths in wealth inequality, political corruption, and worsening conditions for many Americans. After the terrorist attacks on the United States in 2001, many of the gains that had been made in the human rights movement were lost. Torture and indefinite detention were embraced by our own government. Fundamental human rights were violated in the name of national security. The rise of authoritarian leaders around the world threatens to further normalize an approach to governance that relies on fear and alienation instead of the ideals that give humanity hope. Therefore, your undertaking could not be more timely. We must build a world together that rests firmly on a foundation of the enduring principles found in the Declaration of Human Rights, that every person is equal in dignity and rights, and that we can face every challenge and solve the most intractable problems as long as we stay true to this universal creed. Rosalind joins me in sending our best wishes for success in your efforts. Sincerely, Jimmy Carter.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Jane Kim, and I hail from a small town in California, San Francisco, where I serve on the Board of Supervisors. And I'm really proud to be part of a city which pioneered Healthy San Francisco, a program which launched in 2007 to provide subsidized medical insurance for uninsured residents in San Francisco, regardless of citizenship and documentation. We are the first city to attempt to provide health insurance for all of our residents, and in fact, over 90% of our uninsured residents are now a part of our Healthy San Francisco program. So you all know, but according to a June 2018 poll, 63% of Americans support some type of national health insurance plan, also known as Medicare for All, a program under which the federal government would guarantee health insurance for everyone in this country. But how do you make this happen? So I am proud to introduce the panel that is before us today. I'd like to introduce our first panelist. And by the way, if you have a friend who just doesn't get Medicare for All or thinks it's a pipe dream that can only occur in the idyllic Canada or Europe, and doesn't think that it can happen here or it's too expensive, have them read one of Diane Archer's pieces, the president of Just Care USA. Diane can break down this incredibly complex policy into a way that you can understand clearly what it would look like, what it will cost, and what it will save for our nation. So please give it up for Diane. Our second panelist is Joe Beardsmore, the senior advisor at Social Practice, who facilitates collaboration in campaigns including Medicare for All in this country, working with the National Nurses United. Joe works to use organizing and direct action to disrupt government narratives around the status quo. Our next speaker is a doctor working to expand healthcare access, in particular to asylum seekers and other vulnerable populations, is a mother, a first-generation immigrant, and yes, this is literally what is in her bio, quote, in her spare time is a city councilor and campaigns to create a greater platform for addressing inequity in Oxfordshire, and is a Labour Party member, Dr. Hosnia Defari Marbini. Our next speaker and also a moderator are both part of the heroic National Nurses Union, Kelly Coogan-Gare, who will moderate today's panel, and Libby Devlin, both serving as directors on the Medicare for All campaign that we are also excited to be a part of here in this country. I just have to give a quick shout out before I introduce our opening speaker to the nurses. For those of you that have worked for a long time in organizing here in this country, you'll know that labor predominantly looks one way, but the California nurses, both their leadership and their member organizers, are primarily women, and fearless, kick-ass women at that. When I started as a youth community organizer in San Francisco, I was part of a collaborative of labor and community-based organizations that was brought together to put together a united progressive agenda in San Francisco. And in that year, in 2005, we were endorsing ballot measures, and there was one around campaign finance reform. And there was only one labor union that was brave and courageous enough to stand for the state ballot measures, and it was the California nurses. And in that year, they were also the first labor union to challenge then the new governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when many other unions were afraid to, because they wanted to have a good relationship, of course, with our highest official at the state. But they took on the governor, staging more than 100 protests in 12 months, advocating for fringe political ideas like public financing in campaigns and Medicare for All. It was 10 years later when I walked into their office for an endorsement, and I remember seeing stacks of Bernie Sanders for president style signs stockpiled throughout this union. And by the way, at this time in 2015, Bernie was still a kind of out there fringe senator from the state of Vermont that was maybe going to get single-digit or teen percentages of votes in primaries across the country, but the nurses had early endorsed him. And I remember thinking, wow, these are some crazy, badass nurses. Well, we saw how that eventually went, and now we're seeing that these fringe political ideas have now become mainstreamed in large part to the work and the leadership of the nurses. And reflecting on Simon's comments last night, they truly are infinite game players. They understand the long-term game and investing in ideas and making sure that we can bring it to reality. So now I have the honor of introducing our opening speaker, who needs no introduction. She is the former state senator of Ohio and our president. I just like to say that. our minister, and the woman who speaks after all of our closing celebrities, even Danny Glover and Cornel West, because no one wants to follow her, and that is Nina Turner.
Thank you, Jane, so very much for that. Good morning, gathering. Good morning. It is a good morning indeed. And so I just want to thank the Sanders Institute so very much for bringing this happy family together, this family that is ready to go into battle for generations to come. Dr. J and Dave and Colleen and others who have helped. You know, it takes teamwork to make the dream work. And we are going to be a team for a very long time, positioning ourselves to pass the baton generation after generation after generation. That is the kind of battle or challenge or life lifting that we're into today. And so for the nurses, and I agree with everything that Jane has just said, I want to set the stage for this just to say these words, that only all that we love is on the line. That's all. Nothing heavy, just only what we love is on the line. That's it. That's all. All that we love is on the line. And so when you think about Medicare for All, when you got to talk to your family, your friends, your neighbors, your play cousins, when you want people to understand what is at stake, just tell them only all that we love is on the line. So the nurses, as Jane pointed out, they really have been on the battlefield for decades, really very much ahead of their time. One person's fringe is another person's visionary. One person's radical, which as a social scientist, as an academic, I don't worry about the word radical. It just depends on what end of radical you are on, because radical just means getting to the root. And we just trying to get to the root of this thing. As Brother James Baldwin said, Dr. West, you can't say that you love the tree if you hate the roots. What we are about is getting at the root. So call us radical, call us fringe, call us whatever you want to call us, but call us visionary, because we understand only all that we love is on the line, and that's all. Just really proud as the leader of our revolution that the nurses and our revolution have been working together nationally to soften the soil, to have the conversations one person to another that are necessary to ensure that our family and our friends and our play cousins understand what is at stake. The way that we touch people, and Dr. J. Simon was preaching my gospel, because I always start off on the emotional first. You can't win somebody's head unless you win their heart. That is the way we roll, and I am so proud that with the nurses, we have been able to touch hundreds of thousands of people in their heart about Medicare for All. And as Senator laid out last night, the people are on our side, and we are on the side of the people. But when you are a visionary, you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so in this movement, we are committed to being uncomfortable for causes that are larger and greater and bigger than us, because only all that we love is on the line. There's a young brother, you all may have heard his story, Alec Rayshawn Smith, age 26, was found dead in his apartment on June 22nd. He was rationing his insulin after he had aged out of his parents' insurance policy. In what country on God's green earth, an industrial nation, a nation that is wealthier than any other nation on the face of this earth, have resources abound that a 26-year-old, we know that elders do it all the time, a 26-year-old ration out his insulin, didn't even tell his parents, and he dies. Only all that we love is on the line. So somebody asks you why we need Medicare for All, tell them this story. Or the story of countless other folks who are either underinsured or uninsured. Tell them the story of people who are suffering in this country because policymakers have decided to answer to their donors, and not answer to the people. You tell them. So that's it. All that we love is on the line. And there's nothing moral about a system which sees for-profit healthcare companies making billions and billions of dollars on the backs and the lives of people. There's nothing moral about that. And so our clarion call at this gathering is to ensure that we leave this place emboldened and better focus and understanding. That's what the panel is going to give us, some understanding, because after we win people's heart, then we can give them the facts. And then they become the ones that can teach the teacher that teaches the teacher, teach and lead and guide and inspire other people to understand that the tax dollars belong to us. It's our money. This is about a social contract. This is a social contract. It's our money. So if we tell these folks that we want to use our money to have a Medicare for all system, that we want to honor our social contract one to another, what is wrong with that? And if anybody in the Congress, and I mean anybody, but especially Democrats, who will not stand up for Medicare for all, when the folks in Congress have the best health insurance policy that our tax dollars can buy, only all that we love is on the line. And that's how we're going to approach this, in boldness, in truth. And that really is what this panel is about. I'm going to close my remarks this morning coming from President Nelson Mandela, Dr. West, Mayor Newport. President Nelson Mandela said these words, and I want you, other than all that we love is on the line, that's what I want you to remember is what I said today. All that we love is on the line. That is the answer. That's the response to any question about why we must have in the 21st century. It is a sin and a shame that a 26-year-old will die, or an 80-year-old would die, or a 55-year-old would die. And as nurses know, babies die. That poor mamas and daddies who struggle every single day cannot afford to pay health care for their health care. Health care is a moral right, a moral obligation in this country that has economic benefits too. So we can talk to people from the moral side, or we can talk to them from the economic side. But what we must talk about, that in our lifetime in the United States of America, that we will have Medicare for all, because only all that we love is on the line. That's all. That's it. And we don't want any excuses. So Brother Glover, Dr. West, this is what President Nelson Mandela said. It always seems impossible until it is done. Always. And so we are committed to making sure that in this country that Medicare for all is done, because only all that we love is on the line.
All right, panel's done. Welcome again. I just want to say a few words about why the social and political moment in which we find ourselves is particularly powerful. Many of you in this audience have probably seen or at least heard about Michael Moore's 2007 documentary, Sicko, on the failures of our for-profit healthcare industry. In that documentary, he interviews former British parliamentarian Tony Benn. Moore asks Benn about the birth of a national healthcare system in the United Kingdom. Benn responds, quote, "Well, if you go back, it all began with democracy. Before we had the vote, all power was in the hands of rich people. If you had money, you could get healthcare, education, care for looking after yourself when you are old. What democracy did was to give the poor the vote. And it moved power from the marketplace to the polling station, from the wallet to the ballot. What people said was very simple. They said in the 1930s we had mass unemployment, but we don't have unemployment during the war. If you could have full employment killing Germans, why can't you have full employment by building hospitals, by building schools, recruiting nurses, recruiting teachers? If you can find money to kill people, you can find money to help people. In the midst of their extreme post-Second World War economic devastation, the British people demonstrated their solidarity by nationalizing their healthcare system. 70 years later, we live in a very different world. Neoliberal capitalism has swept the globe. Healthcare systems around the world are succumbing to privatization as they undergo unparalleled budget cuts. What were once robust single-payer and national healthcare systems are now two-tier healthcare systems in which younger, healthier, lower-risk patients are cherry-picked by commercial providers to receive better and faster care. Premiums, deductibles, and copays are introduced or increased. The result in every instance is greater social and economic inequality. These unprecedented levels of social and economic inequality have brought us to the brink of fascism. At its core, fascism combines enormous economic discontent caused by neoliberalism with the crisis of white supremacy and a deep sense of emasculation. The underlying theme of our panel is this: Medicare for all and its recent growth in popularity is intricately linked to a much broader fight for participatory democracy and against proto-fascism and its highly toxic radicalization of the right. Yes, Medicare for all guarantees health care for everyone. Yes, it also delinks health care from employment status, restoring enormous industrial power to working people. But what our enemies fear most is this: Medicare for all gives a fifth of our economy back to the people and increases the size, strength, and power of our democratic government. When the findings of the Libertarian Mercatus Center study on single payer were released midsummer, we witnessed the study's author, Charles Blehaus, make a fascinating about-face. Those of us on the left were justifiably delighted by the fact that a libertarian study demonstrated a $2 trillion savings in our national health expenditure over a 10-year period. For Blehaus, the emphasis was instead on the significant increase in our federal health expenditures to $32.6 trillion over that same 10-year period. The libertarian agenda was laid bare. It is not interested in reducing our astronomically unsustainable national health care spending. Even the proliferation of opportunities for privatization in our healthcare system is a secondary priority. The ultimate aim is to use healthcare reform as yet one more systemic vehicle to shrink the power and reach of our democratic government. It is not hyperbole to say that our fight for Medicare for all is a part of a much broader struggle to unchain democracy, to borrow phrasing from historian Nancy McLean. The values that undergird Medicare for all, fairness, equity, universality, as well as the values of the nurses, caring, compassion, community, are values inherent in democracy and are values that almost every single social justice movement can get behind. Now I will turn it over to Diane. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Let's see if I can find my slide. There we go. I'm delighted to be here with you to talk about Medicare for All and why the only meaningful and sustainable way to guarantee everyone in the United States health care is through a single federally administered health system. And contrary to what some liberal lawmakers and policy gurus believe, keeping our commercial health insurance system and adding a public option, offering people the choice of Medicare, is not a workable middle ground. When you combine commercial insurance with a public option, Medicare, you create a fragmented, inefficient system that can't contain costs or guarantee people's health and financial security or promote the long-term public health. The good news is that 70% of Americans now support expanding Medicare to guarantee coverage for everyone, including half of all Republicans. And that's because Medicare for All speaks to our core values and offers the freedom to see the doctors and hospitals we know and trust anywhere in the United States, without insurer middlemen getting between us and our doctors, and without premiums, deductibles, and coinsurance. We have two big challenges. They're both heavy lifts. We need to help policymakers and others understand the difference between Medicare, which is social insurance, and commercial insurance. Medicare is designed to serve people, all people, including people with costly and complex conditions. Commercial insurance is designed to avoid people with costly conditions. Commercial insurers maximize profits the less care they offer. As a result, commercial insurance is a parasite on a social insurance system. It feeds health system inefficiencies, shifts costs onto the social insurance plan, Medicare, and threatens people's health and economic well-being. The second heavy lift is we need to make Congress pass Medicare for all. We need to organize and exert enormous political pressure. We need to help the people who think they're satisfied with their commercial health insurance and who are scared of change think again. It can be easy to fear change if you're relatively healthy and use very little health care. But here's the good news. I've never met anyone who loves their health insurance company. Have you? So here's the key point. Medicare for all means far less change than most people face today. You get continuity of care and coverage from the doctors you want to see at less cost. Today, people who lose their jobs or switch jobs or whose employers switch their health plans are constantly seeing their coverage and cost change. And even people who remain in the same health plan see their coverage and cost change, with doctors moving in and out of networks and premiums, coinsurance, and deductibles mounting. So this is my attempt to show you how we get, where are we here? Oh, okay, sorry. This is my attempt to show you how we get to all that we love, how we sleep well at night, how we get to Medicare for all. Keeping commercial insurance and simply regulating doctor and hospital prices, as some argue, while necessary in any viable healthcare system, isn't sufficient. The problem with our healthcare system goes far beyond costs. Even if Congress decided to extend Medicare's lower prices to commercial insurers, the U.S. health system would still not meet our individual or collective needs. We have to eliminate commercial health insurers because they force people to gamble with their health and their savings. It's not possible to pick a commercial health plan and know whether it will meet your current and future needs. Commercial health plans are designed not to meet everyone's needs. That's why they say pick one that's right for you. Their narrow networks, arbitrary delays and denials of care, and high out-of-pocket costs penalize people who need costly care and keep people from getting the care they need. We need to end systemic bureaucratic waste and profiteering. Commercial insurers drive up administrative costs and pocket profits for their shareholders rather than investing in their members' needs, let alone the public health. They don't look out for the long-term collective health of Americans. We need a transparent, single-payer healthcare system, Medicare for all that we love, so we understand what's working and what's not working, and the government can drive systemic improvements. Commercial insurers hide their data, claiming it's proprietary. Their financial incentives are not aligned with the public good. So, this is one of my favorite images. Commercial health plans are only as strong as their weakest link, and that link is weak. They almost have to be in the race to the bottom, steering clear of delivering good, affordable care to people who most need it. Here's the key point. Commercial insurers don't compete to deliver better care at lower cost for people with costly needs, and never will. It's not in their financial interest. Think about it. When was the last time you heard Aetna or United Health boast about its great cancer or stroke care, or say, join us if you have heart disease? In New York, not a single plan on the state health insurance exchange includes Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Why not? To maximize profits, commercial insurers want to keep people with cancer from signing up with them. Where's the health plan that says if you need costly care, you can use top doctors and hospitals with low costs? That's the one we all want. That's Medicare for all. You can't get that from a commercial health plan. In fact, you have no clue what you're getting. Here's what we do know. If we all got together to offer the best commercial insurance available with a robust network of the best hospitals and doctors, we'd be out of business before we opened our doors. Everyone needing costly care would join. We couldn't spread costs across healthy and sick, and we couldn't afford to deliver needed care. And that, in a nutshell, is why commercial insurers will never meet our needs. There's no way to create a level playing field between commercial insurers and Medicare. Commercial insurers will always game the system if there's a public option. Only if there's a single payer, as with Medicare for All, can you pool and broadly distribute risk, drive down costs, and guarantee everyone good coverage. So today we have Medicare Advantage plans in Medicare. They're the commercial health plans that are an alternative to the traditional Medicare system, which is social insurance. And they illustrate the perils of offering everyone a choice between commercial insurance and a public option. Because the commercial Medicare Advantage insurers shift costs to people who are in poor health and keep out-of-pocket costs low for people who are healthy, healthier people choose them, leaving traditional Medicare with sicker enrollees and driving up its costs. We might think of these commercial for-profit Medicare Advantage plans as corporate take-advantage plans that take advantage of taxpayer dollars and undermine the traditional Medicare program, or fake advantage plans that disadvantage the Medicare program. Medicare Advantage plans have all the core failings of commercial insurance. They restrict choice and limit the doctors and hospitals enrollees can use. They don't compete with one another to deliver value. They drive more people in poor health into traditional Medicare, increasing its cost. They offer meaningless choice. People have no clue what they're getting when they join. They're gambling with their health and finances. They're inequitable. They discriminate against the sick. They ration people's care based on their ability to pay. They're unreliable. They're constantly changing the products and services they offer. They're unsustainable. They cannot rein in costs or slow down the rate of growth in healthcare spending. They're inefficient. They drive up costs through the time, money, and personnel they require for billing and other administrative activities. They're profit-driven. They put shareholders first ahead of member needs. Medicare Advantage plans have no incentive to innovate for the public good. What they learn about what's working and not working in our healthcare system, they tend to keep to themselves. They're unaccountable. They prevent needed oversight and public understanding of areas where they're failing consumers. And they're unethical. Medicare Advantage plans too often engage in fraudulent and illegal behavior. So why do 1 in 3 people choose a Medicare Advantage plan? It's hard to believe they choose a commercial plan for its restricted networks or high deductibles. More likely, they have no real choice. My bet, few people would join a Medicare Advantage plan if traditional Medicare didn't mean they had to spend a lot of money to buy supplemental coverage to fill gaps. Medicare for All fills those gaps. So one more point. As we've learned from Medicare Advantage, federal subsidies to commercial health insurers only grow corporate power and influence, which threatens the public option, the Medicare option. Why does Medicare for All work? Medicare for All works because it is designed for everyone. One health insurance system that meets everyone's needs through cradle to grave for the public good, not-for-profit, automatic, guaranteed, bringing everyone together so that the costs of care are spread fairly and equitably across all. Medicare for All addresses the root problems with our healthcare system. It treats everyone equally, young and old, rich and poor, healthy and sick, no matter where in the U.S. we live. It reins in healthcare spending, guarantees access to needed care without the burden of high costs if we're sick. It's accountable to the public, not to shareholders, and it promotes the long-term public health. We've been working hard, and we've made some great progress. The stage is set. Medicare for All is in the air. Onward.
Since Jean Ross, co-president of NNU, can't be here due to a last-minute family emergency, she asked for me to deliver the remarks that she prepared. And I really just want to say that this panel was organized by National Nurses United. We are a union, bedside nurses, 155,000 members strong. We have, since our inception, supported Medicare for All and fought for Medicare for All. So now, from Jean. I've been a registered nurse for 40 years. As a nurse, I am on the front lines of our country's acute healthcare crisis caused by an immoral healthcare industry that prioritizes profits over humanity and healing. Because nurses work directly with human beings when they are at their most vulnerable, we have a special vantage point into how to fix our broken healthcare system. I'm going to safely assume that many in this room agree that our healthcare system, with the private insurance industry, big pharma, and for-profit hospital systems in the driver's seat, is irretrievably broken. A good portion of us likely concur that the only way forward is Medicare for all. It guarantees healthcare for everyone, cements into law healthcare as a fundamental human right, and ensures human lives are valued over corporate profits. Today, you will hear a lot about why single payer makes fiscal and social sense. I want to discuss why Medicare for All is the only way forward if we are to ever live in a truly just, caring, and moral society. For nurses, the moral argument for Medicare for All is intricately interwoven with the policy argument. Every day, by virtue of our caring labor at the bedside, nurses witness people refusing or being denied treatment and medication due to cost. Perhaps their insurance doesn't cover the treatment, or they, like over 40% of Americans, cannot afford co-pays and deductibles, or they, like close to 30 million Americans, simply have no insurance. This is morally deplorable. One's ability to stay alive should never be based in someone else's ability to make a profit. From the standpoint of nurses, we need Medicare for All first and foremost because it gives our patients health care on the basis of need, not ability to pay. But we also need Medicare for All because it helps us directly address the core underlying problems that cause illness in our patients and broader social ills, social, economic, and racial inequalities and injustices, immense economic insecurity caused by neoliberal capitalism, the stress on working families of mounting medical debts, the frustration and despair caused by losing coverage when our patients lose their jobs, oftentimes right at the very moment when their families most need health care, and the division and resentment bred by means-tested solutions like Medicaid. Over the past several months, I had the privilege of traveling to the United Kingdom, Canada, and Cuba to better understand the national healthcare systems and single-payer healthcare systems of these countries. To be sure, all three share a fundamental similarity that it is at odds with our healthcare system. In each of these countries, accessing patient care is based on need and not ability to pay. Nye Bevan, the former miner who went on to become a member of British Parliament and the founder of the National Health Service, rightfully observed the impact the NHS had on enriching every aspect of British society. Quote, "Society becomes more wholesome, more serene, and spiritually healthier if it knows that its citizens have at their back of their consciousness the knowledge that not only themselves, but all their fellows have access when ill to the best that medical skill can provide," end quote. The arrogance of our market-driven society tricks us into thinking that the moral argument is not sufficiently sophisticated or pragmatic to drive high-level policy discussions and considerations. Yet I learned from my experience in these countries that the moral argument for a mission-driven healthcare system is really the only argument strong enough to create the political will necessary for the full realization of healthcare as a human right. In the Canadian and UK healthcare systems, privatization and corporatization are rearing their ugly heads. The experience of both countries is a cautionary tale of how conceding to market-driven concerns ends up eroding and undermining the entire healthcare system. Yet Cuba has managed to create a healthcare system deeply aligned with the political will of the people. I want to spend just a moment discussing each of these healthcare systems. Canadian Medicare guarantees healthcare to all their residents. It is publicly administered, comprehensive in coverage, universal, portable, and free at the point of care. Nevertheless, Canada is the only developed country in the world with a universal healthcare system that does not cover essential prescription medications prescribed outside of a hospital. Because of this, patients actually try to be admitted into hospitals to receive desperately needed medications. Coupled with the greed of the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry, this system has made drug prices in Canada the third most expensive in the world. The result is that 1 in 5 Canadian families cannot afford their prescription medications. This is why nurses, along with the Canadian Labour Congress and other advocacy groups, have come together to launch a campaign for national pharmacare, a single-payer, universal prescription drug program for all Canadians, which will save Canada about $4.2 billion each year. The National Health Service in the United Kingdom is a publicly funded national health system that provides comprehensive, universal care free at the point of delivery. All citizens in the United Kingdom are guaranteed a full breadth of critical and non-critical Medicare services without payment. But this system is in grave danger, as you will hear more about from Hasnia in just a moment. In recent years, establishment politicians have worked with private interests to transform the NHS from an integrated public service to one reliant on expanded private sector involvement. What is happening right now in the NHS is a prime example of the austerity, then privatization formula. A public system gets starved by austerity measures, enabling the private sector to act as a knight in shining armor, saving the starving system from itself. For me, the greatest hope is to be found in the Cuban healthcare system. What I witnessed is a genuine universal system that provides Cubans outpatient care, hospitalizations, pharmaceuticals, optometry, dental care, and whatever is required for the full restoration of health. So it's not surprising that Cubans are among the healthiest people in the world. The child mortality rate is equivalent to that of the United States. The child mortality rate is lower than some of the world's richest countries. Life expectancy is equivalent to that of the United States. Actually, the United States has a worse child mortality rate. And vaccination rates are among the highest in the world. Cuba achieves all of this while spending only $813 on healthcare per person each year. Meanwhile, our country spends $10,349 per person each year. What I found primarily separates the Cuban system from all others is that healthcare is viewed as a fundamental human right and is written into the Cuban Constitution. Social determinants of health are understood as integral to overall health, and as a result, the country is committed to ensuring all people are housed, fed, and educated. Indeed, Cuba's literacy rate is 99%, and health education is part of the mandatory school curriculum. Cuba lives the morals and values the left espouses. I experienced Cuba's healthcare system as mission-driven, not market-driven. It is devoted to creating life-saving treatments for the many, not profits for the few. My story of Cuba isn't just about guaranteeing health care for everyone for much less than what we pay in the United States. It is a story of inspired and compassionate moral and political will. It is a story of a country whose people have come together collectively to make a decision that caring for one another is more important than profiting off of someone else's suffering. A lack of health care is not the result of limited resources. If a country makes it a priority to care for its people, then it will care for its people. The only thing that stands in the way of us winning Medicare for all in the United States is a lack of this political and moral will. But this collective will is growing, as we saw by the astonishing number of pro-Medicare for all candidates who won during the midterms. People are starving for a system that embodies health care as a human right. They are searching desperately for leaders with enough courage to legislate that system into being. In closing, here's what we know for sure about our struggle. We know the pharmaceutical and insurance industries are coming for us with every weapon in their arsenal. We know that these industries will line the pockets of the shape-shifting extreme center of the Democratic Party in an endeavor to sabotage our efforts with a public option. We know that the nurses and our allies will have to literally inoculate the public against our enemy's agenda harder than we ever have before. We know that we will not win our fight if we do not cultivate and harness the expansive will of a grassroots who is deeply exhausted from a healthcare system that profits from their pain and their suffering. We know that the political will of the people is not built on the fine intricacies of policy debate, but is built on the deep collective recognition that our current system is immoral. Our ability to change that system is simply a matter of strategically harnessing our people power. We know that the nurses will continue to lead this effort as we have been doing for decades. We know how to fight for the most vulnerable, how to educate and problem solve. The public trusts and respects us precisely because we always put our patients' needs first. And right now, we need to put humanity's needs first and fight for Medicare for all. And finally, we know that our time for a just healthcare system has come. Thank you.
Good morning. Being here amongst all our distinguished guests and speakers is a huge honour. The gathering's mission to revitalise democracy is one that speaks to many of us across the pond. It is as pressing in the UK as it is here. I'm here to talk to you about my National Health Service, the NHS. Its heart, its soul, and its backbone. I want to start by talking about trust. In my humble opinion, the most valued currency in politics is trust. Trust that comes with a sense of security in one's life at present and one's future. The NHS has prevailed as it provides that sense of security and hence inspires trust in the millions who use it daily. The NHS has earned love and trust because it is based on need, not on means. The trust in the NHS was built around the humble general practitioner, a family doctor supporting you from cradle to grave. This was a concept totally alien to me when I arrived in the UK aged 13 from Iran. A country where if you can afford it, who use private healthcare rather than a government-run service. Oddly familiar, isn't it? Recently, Jeremy Corbyn was asked why he thinks socialism would work in Britain. His answer? Look at the basis of our most valued institution, the NHS. The NHS is based on the socialist principle of access according to need, not ability to pay. This is the heart and soul of the NHS. It is no exaggeration to say that this British institution is revered and is more of a national obsession than a great cup of tea, or in fact, the weather. It is revered as it provides that most basic of human rights, free, universal healthcare at your time of need. As Martin Luther King put it so eloquently, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. I've had the honour of working in the NHS for many years, but to truly understand the value of the universal healthcare it provides, you have to experience it as a patient. With the storm of Brexit gathering pace, I had a healthy baby boy at our local hospital. I had been practicing cardiac anaesthesia shortly before this, and as some of my medical colleagues may empathise, my most pressing anxiety was that this baby was bound to be born with a heart defect. At no point did I have to worry about going bankrupt as a result of possible medical bills. Sadly, as a study in the American Journal of Medicine recently revealed, 42% of Americans have depleted their entire life's assets a mere 2 years after being diagnosed with cancer. At the 70th birthday of the NHS this summer, it seems pertinent to remind us all that the NHS was established as a publicly funded, publicly provided, and publicly accountable service. As a Second World War veteran who recently deceased and political commentator Harry Leslie Smith put it, the NHS is an institution for the people, by the people. These founding principles are being progressively dismantled. This has been a political choice through, in particular, the Conservative reforms in 2012. The hugely unpopular reforms have meant a market-based contract model. This has opened the gates to bidding wars, increase in private finance initiative contracts, and hugely pricey external advisors. With an underfunded NHS and a social care system on its knees due to cuts in local council expenditure, this fragmentation and privatisation has had a devastating impact on patients' health. Patients, such as my constituent Joe, a retired postman, who relies on 10-minute social care visits from a private provider. These visits are means-tested and wholly inadequate. I ask you, what does this do to someone's dignity, to their sense of place in society? In hospitals up and down the country, changing a light bulb is carried out by outsourcing via a now bankrupt Carillion maintenance service. A parliamentary report confirmed this year that not only has the NHS paid well over the mean, the odds for many projects, it is now tied to contracts that it can't afford to keep or get out of. The cost of changing that light bulb is increasing by the day. A story that I'm sure is familiar to many of you here. The political marketisation of this public service, austerity, worsening inequality, and the real possibility of a truly progressive government led by Jeremy Corbyn inspired me to dedicate my late evenings to campaigning and multiple meetings in very cold community halls, fueled by cups of tea and biscuits. The good news story is that I haven't been alone. Hundreds of others like me have joined the campaign. The trade union movement has been built on fighting social injustice and giving a collective voice to the less powerful in society. Trade unionists understand that the NHS is the backbone of a fairer society. This call to arms has felt very natural to health and social care workers. I will endeavour to give you a flavour of these movements over the next few minutes, ending in my hometown of Oxford. Daniel Tiplady is a young student nurse who was inspired to start the Bursary or Bust campaign. This was after nursing student subsidies were cut, forcing further debt onto these dedicated individuals. 2 years on from the removal of the NHS student bursary, applications to nursing degree courses have plummeted by a third in England. There's currently a shortage of 40,000 nurses. There are multiple reports of nurses using food banks in one of the richest nations in the world. Daniel's tireless campaigning has won her many supporters, including MPs on both sides of the political divide, and the Royal College of Nursing, which used to be apolitical. It's difficult to see and understand what that means anymore, don't you think? In fact, there have been huge recent changes in this nursing union of nearly 500,000 members. The executive resigned over the summer due to grassroots anger at the way the union sold the new NHS pay deal to its members, despite not really understanding the complex deal on offer. New council candidates are now standing on a platform of bringing the college back to its members. Over 900 catering, cleaning and portering staff in Wigan, Lancashire, that's in Northern England, were so concerned by the plan to outsource them that they voted for strike action via the trade unions Unison and Unite. This move would have meant possible worsening of terms and conditions and the move to a private sector company. The strike ended once Labour-led Wigan Council brokered a deal with a withdrawal of the proposed outsourcing. The healthcare assistants I work with express similar concerns about making ends meet and avoiding homelessness. Staff in their 40s and 50s are forced to live in shared accommodation with up to 2/3 of their salaries spent on a small bedroom. Coming back to Dreaming Spires of Oxford now, we are set to become an integrated care system. You may well be asking, what is an integrated care system? Or its more toxic predecessor, the Accountable Care Organisation. If you're in the dark, don't worry, you're in good company. In a recent study, only 16% of Conservative members of Parliament said they understood what an accountable care organisation was. These American imports seem to be injecting organisations focused on profit-making into the heart of NHS decisions about who provides what and at what cost to patients. We're challenged in the courts backed by none other than Stephen Hawking. They tell us this is supposed to deliver integration of health and social care services. Nobody would say that's a bad thing, surely. Sadly, these are not statutory bodies, and as such, there is no public accountability. In fact, locally, the proposed board responsible for the delivery of this colossal change does not have a single elected official on it. There is a worrying lack of clarity, which makes true engagement and consultation impossible. I am fighting these issues with my colleagues in Socialist Health Association, Keep Our NHS Public, and indeed via the council chambers. The market-driven approach will always cherry-pick. It will never take on the small, time-consuming, hard-to-measure interventions that made the UK healthier than much of the world and for less money than anywhere else. I find it fascinating and distressing in equal measures that though we in the UK and here in the USA are at different points in our healthcare story, the battles with marketisation and essentially a neoliberal ideology are the same battle. Make no mistake, this is about ideology. In terms of health inequalities in the UK, we are heading fast towards the USA. The men in the richest part of Oxford can expect to live to the grand old age of 90 in relatively good health. The men in my ward of Northfield Brook to the age of 74.6. The conventions of speechwriting dictate that I should end on a note of hope for the future. And thankfully, that's not hard for me to find. Inequality, and in particular health inequality, has recently been the focus of speeches and policy development by Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Labour Secretaries of Health and Education, amongst many others. They are reflecting what we see at the grassroots level, and it is at the grassroots that these battles will be won. There is now a real thirst in our countries for truth and for heart and soul politics. Universal healthcare truly is the beating heart of a civilised society. What better way to regain trust than by providing universal healthcare? I would like to end on a personal note from Oxfordshire. As I mentioned right at the beginning, being the child of a refugee and arriving in the UK as a teenager means I am passionate about the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. I am hugely proud of my comrades who recently won a 25-year battle to close the local detention centre. I would like to end on a poem by Shelley, written in 1819 after the Peterloo massacre, of the poor peacefully protesting for their right to vote. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Joe. I'm an organiser on the Medicare for All campaign with National Nurses United, and also a member of the Labour Party and an activist and organiser with Momentum. Yeah. As a Brit, born and raised in the National Health Service, moving to the US was a shock. Back home, I was involved in grassroots organising efforts to fight back against the austerity agenda being pushed by successive governments. But nothing prepared me for what it would be like living and raising a family under the austerity regime here. We don't have a healthcare system in the USA. We have a healthcare crisis. Navigating this broken and bureaucratic minefield pushed me to join the fight for healthcare justice. I have a second point of motivation. This year, people in the UK celebrated the 70th birthday of the National Health Service. For 70 years, people in the UK have had world-class universal healthcare free at the point of use. I believe it's about time that people in the US had that too. I'm going to talk to you about the big organising techniques that are being used by National Nurses United in the fight to win an expanded and improved Medicare for all. And it's fitting to talk with you all about this organising approach here at the Sanders Institute, as many of the techniques we use were pioneered on the Bernie campaign in 2016. At the heart of big organising is the idea that there is a huge but largely untapped capacity in the grassroots ready to be called into service to help win progressive causes. In order to mobilise people at the scale needed to win, we have to offer political solutions as radical as the problems we face. Technical sounding policies, tinkering at the edges of systemic problems simply won't cut it. But it's not enough just to mobilise people. We need to offer a clear plan that shows a path to victory that people can understand and engage with under leadership they trust. And we need to help people to plug into that plan and get to work wherever they are. Our organising efforts draw on the finest parts of the community organising tradition. But by utilising new technologies and systems, we can scale these in a way that organisers schooled in the Alinsky model could never have dreamed of. When we have a credible plan to win and can invite people to get to work on a bold goal, we have a shot at building a volunteer army capable of overpowering corporate interests and the conservatism of establishment politicians. So before talking about how we are applying these organising principles in the Medicare for All campaign, I want to share the story of Momentum, the grassroots movement that has propelled Corbyn to the brink of becoming Britain's first democratic, socialist Prime Minister in a generation. By demonstrating how these techniques have worked in the UK, I hope to show why I believe they will help us win here as well. The United Kingdom is in the midst of a political revolution, and I'm not talking about Brexit. In the space of a few short years, the Labour Party has been transformed from a stale, conservative, and unpopular institution into a genuine champion of progressive and radical change. In the process, it has become the largest political party in the Western world. The figurehead of this revolution is Jeremy Corbyn, but the driving force has been ordinary people, many of whom are completely new to politics. Momentum has been one of the main conduits through which these people have been able to get active. Jeremy was elected as Labour's leader by a groundswell of members that were sick of seeing the party pandering to an imagined centre ground, which offered only incremental answers to the huge challenges we face, and which was failing to challenge the neoliberal consensus. We leapt at the chance to elect a leader willing to call out the rigged economic system, who could speak with authenticity, and who presented a vision of a society that works for the many and not the few. Momentum, the organisation, was created to try and maintain the momentum of Jeremy's leadership campaign. It has grown in strength through the experience of collective struggle. As my trade union sisters will attest, it is the best political education you can get. Continued attacks from the establishment has had the unintended consequence of helping us to build the infrastructure needed to fight and to win. Born of necessity, we have honed campaign techniques and built a network of people ready and willing to put in the work necessary to transform the country. This stood us in good stead when a surprise election was called in 2017. According to the experts, the outlook for Labour was bleak, 21 points behind in the polls. But in the space of 6 weeks, we turned this around, giving Labour the biggest increase in their share of the vote since 1945, and winning in parts of the country that the Conservatives had dominated for generations. Momentum organisers utilised big organising techniques and technologies to engage and mobilise supporters. Trust was placed in volunteers to take on responsibilities and perform tasks that most campaigns would only entrust to paid staff. Social media was used to drive people into effective organising efforts. Spending just £2,000, so that's, $2,500 on paid Facebook advertisements, and relying on organic reach, Momentum was able to repeatedly create viral content that burst out of the bubble. 1/3 of the UK's Facebook users were reached by Momentum-made content over the 6-week election period. The focus of all of these organising efforts was to reach out to people who are usually excluded from the political process, listen to their concerns, and invite them to join us in the fight to solve them. To do this, Momentum trained volunteer canvassers in persuasion techniques that went beyond the usual data collection. Canvassers found that this dialogue-focused approach immediately broke down barriers on the doorstep and fostered a sense of solidarity in the face of political challenges which often alienate and isolate people. The scale of the volunteer effort mobilised by big organising and the big political vision on offer meant that Momentum could ignore the conventional wisdom of only canvassing a small number of people, previously identified voters in key seats, but instead attempted to engage and interact with as many people as possible. The similarities and parallels between the movements that have coalesced around Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders are self-evident. But these similarities are not just the result of similar political contexts and visions. They are the result of active solidarity. Many of the big organising techniques utilised and refined by Momentum were pioneered on the Bernie campaign. Some of these reached the UK thanks to Becky Bond and Zach Exley's excellent book, Rules for Revolutionaries. Others were brought by organisers from the Bernie campaign who travelled to the UK to help, recognising the commonality in our political struggles. This is what solidarity looks like, the sharing of tactics and strategies that work. The Nurses' campaign for Medicare for All draws on the key lessons that are being learned on both sides of the pond. Popular support for Medicare for All was ignited by Bernie's campaign. The nurses are turning that popular support into political power by putting people to work. We are building a mass movement, applying strategic pressure on elected officials to force them to fall in line behind the vision of a just healthcare system. Some people seem to think that to aim for an expanded and improved Medicare for All is too ambitious. But we know that it is only by aiming for such an ideal that we will mobilise enough people to take action to help us to win. If we don't aim high, we will fall low and will become compromised even before we start to negotiate. So we train volunteers in the persuasive canvassing techniques that prove so effective in the UK. We knock on every door. We talk to everyone. And we listen to them. People connect with politics on an emotional and personal basis, so we don't bombard them with statistics. Our canvassing puts an emphasis on listening and sharing experiences. And it turns out that nurses are the best people in the world at doing this. They do it every day at the bedside, caring for their patients. These canvassing techniques are grounded in the tradition of one-to-one conversations at the heart of Alinsky-style community organising. Big organising allows us to have these conversations at a previously unimaginable scale. Earlier this month, Senator Sanders, Senator Turner, and Congresswoman Jayapal joined our organisers in hosting a mass conference call to kick-start the national campaign for Medicare for All. Nearly 6,000 people replied to our call to action, and thousands committed to playing a leading role in organising the movement in their state. The union have identified key congressional targets that we need to win over in order to progress the Medicare for All bill through the House. During the second week of February, supporters in those districts will organise barnstorms. These mass organising meetings focus on putting people to work and will be used to recruit people to start door knocking and applying pressure on their recalcitrant representatives. Supporters outside of those districts will recruit volunteers to set up peer-to-peer text and phone banks calling into the key districts, thereby harnessing people power from across the nation, strategically targeted to maximise impact. This is how we will win Medicare for All, by building a people-powered movement at such a scale that it can overpower corporate interests and establishment politicians. In the right moment, with the right big ideas and the right organising campaign, we can win. We can defend the principle of healthcare justice in the UK. We can win healthcare justice in the US. People are uniting behind this bold vision. If this is our moment, and we believe it is, we can make true that old slogan that the people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated.
Morning, sisters and brothers. I'm Libby Devlin. I'm the Southern Region Director for National Nurses United. NNU is committed to building working-class organization among nurses who can exert power in order to improve working conditions for all nurses and to improve patient care in this country. Using this big organizing model that Joe just talked about, we created a campaign that would build cadre among nurses, among non-union nurses, to become leaders and activists in Florida and Texas, committed to Medicare for All and RN to patient ratios. The idea was we would identify a committed core of leaders who would work with a militant minority of nurses and then would lead these non-union nurses in the campaign for Medicare for All. I'm happy to say that we were able to do that. We communicated with 200,000 non-union nurses in Florida and Texas about Medicare for All and about the electoral campaigns of Andrew Gillum and Beto O'Rourke. Thousands said they wanted to get involved in the campaign, and a smaller number, but still thousands, said they wanted to play a leadership role in the campaign to win Medicare for All. I'm going to get into a little bit of more detail as we go along, but the key point here is that using this big organizing model, we put together a campaign that got to scale very, very quickly. And the leaders of that campaign are now positioned to join the existing membership of NNU in the campaign to win this extremely important public policy issue, while they'll also be building a working class organization in their hospitals. In order to do this, in order to build the committed core and the cadre, we had to have certain things in place. The first thing is we needed to have a calling card issue. For NNU, the calling card issue is Medicare for All and RN to patient ratios. Not a surprise. This combines an important workplace issue and an important public policy issue that are both very important to nurses. Nurses, as we know, are on the front lines of the healthcare crisis in this country. The work of the registered nurses is core to who they are. Their ability to advocate for their patients is critical to their sense of who they are and what they do. And when they cannot provide the care that they need to, their calling is undermined. They're also very aware that when patient care is denied, what that does is provide additional profits for their employers, as well as for the healthcare industry in general. Every day, the nurses see the damage that is done based on a lack of healthcare. They better than anyone know that what we need in this country is a public policy that provides for a single standard of care that is safe, effective, and therapeutic, and not based on the ability to pay. So as a result, Medicare for All is a calling card issue for NNU and for the nurses. Every industry and organization is going to have their own calling card issue. There is no shortage of struggles in this country right now that people can engage in related to climate justice, immigration, public education, racial justice, ending voter suppression. You get the idea. The point here is that when democracy is under attack the way it is today, the sky is unfortunately the limit. So the first thing that you need is this calling card issue. The second thing you need is a sense of urgency. For us in Florida and Texas, it was the electoral campaigns of Beto O'Rourke for senator and Andrew Gillum for governor that created that sense of urgency. Their campaigns, they were both committed to Medicare for All. There was a tremendous amount of excitement in both states around those campaigns, and it was a way for timing to be right to do this very broad outreach and to create these campaigns that got people very excited. The third thing you need is the proper technology to do this broad outreach, and that's where the big organizing model comes in. We used peer-to-peer texting. It's this technology, it's called Relay. It gave us the ability to get to scale very quickly. In order to reach 200,000 non-union RNs, I keep saying that number because it's shocking to me, we accessed publicly available RN lists, we compared it to the voter file, we created these contact lists. We then had these texting communication with this Relay program. We were able to identify close to 17,000 nurses who wanted to be involved, and 3,000 who wanted to be leaders in the campaign. So this is what we consider sort of the committed core and the militant minority. And they're all in non-union workplaces, non-union hospitals. I will admit I was initially skeptical about this so-called big organizing model. Using technology to reach out to workers, I've been an organizer all my life. I'm like, But I have to say, the problems that we face in this country are daunting. The problems we face as our labor movement are also daunting, and we need to be open to methods that we have not used before. So we tried it out. Prior to the Janus Supreme Court decision, which we all know brought the right to work to the public sector, we were already at an all-time low of 10.7% union density. In the private sector, only 7% of people have collective bargaining. What's worse is that only fewer than 1% of those eligible to participate in elections that would force employers to recognize the union and bargain with the workers, fewer than 1% participate in elections each year in this country. So if we take it as a given that the power of the working class is rooted in our ability to engage in collective action, it is also true that without unions, our ability to exercise power is seriously constrained. So unions need to have a plan for how we are going to engage the 93% of private sector workers who don't currently have collective bargaining. At a minimum, we need to have venues for workers to engage in collective action and shape the outcomes of the important debates in this country. We all know that both U.S. political parties carry out different aspects of neoliberal and libertarian ideologies of increased privatization, austerity, reduced regulation, and free trade. Both political parties seek to concentrate power into the hands of an increasingly smaller number of multinational corporations and libertarian institutions. These ideologies that focus on individual advantage and reward selfishness make no room for collective well-being. And they result in the destruction of any common good that cannot be monetized. We say that the working class must oppose these ideologies, and in order to do that, we have to build organization and get to scale very quickly. That's the theory behind big organizing. In the organizing world, nothing will ever replace one-to-one personal communication and relationships. However, this one-on-one style of organizing may not be sufficient for the challenges that we face. The technology of big organizing model addresses that challenge and allows us to get to scale in reaching out to workers around an issue that they care about, and then identifying those who we can move into action and ultimately into working class organization that can shape public policy and can address workplace issues. So once we identified the interested nurses using this relay technology, we set up 16 county-based meetings with the committed core to discuss what a longer-term movement for Medicare for All might look like in Florida and Texas. In Florida, we held 11 meetings. In Texas, we held 5. Those nurses in those meetings discussed a local plan, and then they reached out to this militant minority that we had identified to engage them further in the campaign. We held trainings specific to the campaign, and we've scheduled additional trainings on how to communicate and organize around Medicare for All. Each county will be part of the overall campaign, participating in the national strategy. But they will also create their own local plan for their region. The idea is that everyone agrees to a common set of principles, and then they get trained to be a leader in the campaign. But locally, people do creative actions so that nurses can build their own local organization. These local actions can really be almost anything, including meetings with local electeds, attending public hearings, town halls, barnstorms, passing city and county resolutions in support of Medicare for All, holding demonstrations, leafleting public areas, farmers markets, libraries, essentially anything that helps them to build organization locally. But here's the kicker. Ultimately, in order to truly exert power, more nurses and workers will need to engage in collective bargaining. And that's a discussion for another day.
So we are way out of time. We're going to close, but before we close, I just want to say how much National Nurses United appreciates being a part of this wonderful Sanders Institute, The Gathering, and how much we appreciate our partnership with the Sanders Institute. All of us will be here over the next 2 days, so please come up and ask us any questions, talk with us more about our Medicare for All campaign, and most importantly, if you were just even slightly inspired by anything that we said today, join us. This is an open source campaign. The idea is that everybody here gets their boots on the ground and joins us in this struggle for healthcare justice in our country. So thank you so much again. We appreciate it.